Today we're going to talk about graphing tangent and cotangent. I'm recording this in the comments, so you will likely hear some side conversations during the video. Just ignore it. So, first thing I would like to do is show you what tangent and cotangent are going to look like on graph.
Oh yeah, you told me.
So, I have a geometer sketch pad graph drawn here, and we're going to trace where tangent is. Do you see how tangent is this length right here, this red bar? Well, as I drag this, it's not showing up here. Hold on. Let's see. Show tangent. There we go. You see how tangent is showing up right there. So as my angle changes, as it's at 0, tangent 0, it starts to increase here. And remember we talked about the fact that when we hit pi over 2, it's going to be undefined. It goes to infinity. But once it hits there, it's undefined, and it starts back up again. And here we go. So tangent's going to repeat, and actually it's going to have values that go over here as well. Now I'm going to erase those markings. Let's see. Oops. I'm going to erase those, and now I want to look at cotangent. You can see cotangent's here. It's this green bar, only I'm graphing it on the y-axis. So this represents cotangent when my angle is here. Now I'm going to drag this, and you can see what cotangent is going to look like. It's going to go off to infinity as I get very, very close to 0. And as I approach pi, it's going to go off to negative infinity. So we're going to have a curve. It looks a lot like tangent, only it's reflected and it's shifted. Now we are going to graph basic tangent and cotangent graphs, and then we're going to transform them today. So the first thing I want you to do is fill in the values that go with y equals tangent of x and y equals cotangent of x. Remember, on the unit circle, tangent is the y-coordinate over the x-coordinate. Cotangent is the x-coordinate over the y-coordinate. So tangent, remember, on the unit circle is y over x. Cotangent is x over y. I want you to fill in these values, and when you're done, press play again and check your answers. So press pause, fill them in, then press play. Here are the answers, and you'll notice I had you fill in values from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2 for tangent and 0 to pi for cotangent. I did that because tangent is continuous on that interval and cotangent is continuous on this interval. The next thing I want to do is I'd like to graph y equals tangent of x. So take a minute, graph what you think it looks like. Press pause on your video feed, and when you're ready, press play again. Here we go. So you'll notice I have pi over 2 graphed, I have positive pi over 2 graphed, I have the midpoint here graphed, which is 0. In between negative pi over 2 and 0, I have negative pi over 4, and in between 0 and pi over 2, I have positive pi over 4. I plotted my curves, I plotted my vertical asymptotes because it's on the line there, and I drew in my curve. The domain is all reals except where there's an asymptote, and there's an asymptote at pi over 2. I picked the first smallest positive asymptote, and I added the period times k, and k is an integer. Really large pen. Hold on. Let's go with this one. K is an integer. And as long as we can all agree that k is an integer, I'm not going to make you write it every time. But every time I go out one period away from pi over 2, I'm going to have another asymptote. So it's the domain everywhere except where there's an asymptote. And then the range is negative infinity to infinity. My period is pi. And there is no amplitude because amplitude is half the difference between the maximum and the minimum values. There is no maximum value here. There is no minimum value here. Next, I want you to graph cotangent of x. Notice we're graphing it between 0 and pi. And press pause on your video feed. When you're ready, press play again, and we will check your answers. Here we go. Notice that I have asymptotes at 0 and pi, and I have halfway between there is pi over 2, and I have it pi over 4 and 3 pi over 4, so everything is equally spaced. And I have my curve drawn in. The domain is all reals except where there's an asymptote. My first non-negative asymptote is 0, so it's all reals except where x equals k times pi. And remember, k is an integer. And again, as long as we can all agree on that, we won't write it every single time. The range is negative infinity to infinity. My period is pi, and there is no amplitude. There is no maximum. There is no minimum. Now, let's graph a tangent curve with some transformations. The first step is to decide what A, B, C, and D are. And you can tell by looking at this, A is 1/2, B is 1, C is pi over 2, and D is 0. Now, we want to find the period. The period of my transformed graph is the period of the non-transformed graph divided by B every time, the absolute value of B. B here is 1, so my period is pi. Now I have the period. There is no amplitude. Okay, now I want to figure out where I'm going to draw my graph. Normally, I would graph tangent between negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. But you got to remember that it may be that you have stretched it or shrink it. So we're going to take each of those and we're going to divide by B. You know what? Let's change our B here. Let's make our B, I don't know, 1/3. Okay, so now let's go back to the period a second because I want to make sure that you see what happens here. And okay, so now my period, changed my B to 1/3. So now my period is pi over 1/3, so it's 3 pi. So now, normally I would graph between negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2 for tangent, but I need to divide by B, so I'm going to divide each of these by 1/3. So that's between negative 3 pi over 2 and positive 3 pi over 2. Now I have to shift it because my C value is pi over 2. I'm shifting it left. I subtract C. So I'm going to subtract pi over 2 from each of these. So when I subtract pi over 2 here, I get negative 4 pi over 2 or negative 2 pi. And over here, I'm going to subtract pi over 2 from this. And I get 2 pi over 2 or pi. Okay. Now, I'm going to find all of my x values. So I got negative 2 pi over here and positive pi over here. So halfway between is going to be one of the points I need to plot. So negative pi over 2 plus pi, negative 2 pi plus pi is negative pi divided by 2 would be negative pi over 2. Now I'm going to find my midpoint here. Negative 2 pi plus negative pi over 2 would be, let's see, negative 4 pi over 2 plus negative pi over 2 would be negative 5 pi over 2 divided by 2, negative 5 pi over 4. Did I do that right? Let's check. Negative 4 pi, negative 5 pi over 2 divided by 2, negative 5 pi over 4. How come that looks like a 9? Let's fix that. Over 4. Okay, now halfway between here and here, again, negative pi over 2 plus 2 pi over 2 would be pi over 2 divided by 2 would be pi over 4. Now, I know what tangent looks like. Remember, I have tangent, I have asymptotes on either side, and my tangent curve goes like this. Now, I'm going to draw in my asymptotes here. And I know that tangent crosses my x-axis right here. Now, there is no amplitude for tangent. However, we're going to pretend for a minute that there's an amplitude. And we also have to make sure, I noticed there's no shift here. Had there been a shift, I would have had to draw in a transformed x-axis. But my x-axis just stays put. Now, on the right-hand side, it is up a pretend amplitude, which is a half. It's up a from my transformed x-axis. So it's up a half, and over here it's down a half. Okay, and then I draw my curve in. Okay, my domain is all real numbers where, I'm going to erase that, where x does not equal an asymptote. So I cannot have it be equal to an asymptote. So my first non-negative asymptote is at pi plus the period times k, 3k pi. K is an integer. My range is from negative infinity to infinity. And that is all. Any question? If you did not follow that, maybe press play, rewind and play it again. Ask a neighbor. Next, I'm going to graph cotangent. Okay. I'm going to change this example a little bit as well. Let's add 1 to the end. Okay. So we need to identify A, B, C, and D. To do that, I need to factor out the 2. And now I can identify A, B, C. A is 3, B is 2, C is pi over 2, and D is equal to 1. Now, find the period. The period is the original period of my graph, pi over b. So it is pi over 2. Their amplitude for both tangent and cotangent, there is no amplitude. Then I need to figure out the x values that I will plot. So with cotangent, normally we would graph between 0 and pi, but I now have shrunk my graph horizontally. So I've got to divide by b. So it's between 0 and pi over 2. And then I have to subtract c, and c is pi over 2. So between minus pi over 2 and 0. Now we'll draw that. So minus pi over 2 is over here. Now we're going to find the midpoint. So that's negative pi over 4. Then halfway between here would be negative pi over 8. Halfway between here would be negative 3 pi over 8. Okay, now my graph has shifted up 1, so I have a transformed x-axis. Oh, I'm going to make this, it's hard to draw it here on the computer. So let's see. Let's draw in a dotted line here, up 1. And my x-axis doesn't look particularly straight, but you get the idea. Now, I know cotangent looks like this. So I'm going to follow that same pattern. I'm going to have a vertical asymptote here and a vertical asymptote here. And I know that I cross my transformed x-axis smack dab in the middle. It's going to go up on the left. Of course, if it was reflected, that's not the case, but it's going to go up on the left, and it's going to go up A. And A is 3. It's kind of a pretend amplitude. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to go up 3 from my transformed x-axis on the left-hand side, and it's going to go down 3 to -2 on the right-hand side. And then we're going to draw my graph in. My domain is all reals except where there's an asymptote. So x cannot equal my first non-negative asymptote's at 0, and my period is pi. So it's my first non-negative asymptote, which is 0, plus the period times k. So x cannot equal k pi over 2. And k again is an integer. And the range is from -infinity to infinity. And there you have it. So now we've graphed tangent and we've graphed cotangent. It's time for you to practice. The assignment is posted on my website. Have a great day.